right, thank you very much. And I want to thank the Indonesia Business Council for inviting me and for organizing this very important session on Indonesia's foreign policy and geopolitical strategy in a world of rapidly changing world order. We have a very strong panel today. We have Professor Amitav Acharya, professor from American University. May I ask you to stand up? Yeah. We have Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs, Arif Hafaz Ugroseno, long known to be the rising star of Indonesian diplomacy. We have Tony Fernandez. I don't know where he's sitting, but he's the President, Director, or CEO of Air Asia, and my beloved squash partner. Yes, and also Yuki Tajima, Associate Professor and founding rector of Georgetown Asia School, Asia Pacific. Yes, good. May I ask all of you to step to the stage so we can begin our discussions here. Let's give them a big round of applause here. Thank you, and I think we need to do better next time on this gender balance, I guess, right? And I apologize for that. I want to start with Amitav. You know, I just got back from Munich, Munich Security Conference, and I have been attending that for many years, and this is the first time that everybody felt very gloomy, gloomy about Europe and gloomy about the world order. There are just so many moving pieces. There's so many new developments that are unexpected. And much of this new development do not give cause for optimism. Yeah. But there are also strategic opportunities. We don't know where some of these moving chess will go. Some are hoping that it will create new opportunities, and we'll see. Right? But definitely there's a greater sense of uncertainty. Boundaries are shifting. Old assumptions are also being challenged. Definitely, the world order as we knew it before has moved on, right? And we don't know what is the shape of the emerging world order. So this is why I want to invite first Professor Amitav Acharya, if you can describe some trends that you see happening and summarize it for us in terms of how the world order is changing before our eyes. Yeah? And then after that, we get into more about Indonesia's foreign policy and ASEAN. Professor Amitav. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's a real privilege to be here. And I want to say I'm really excited to be with Tony Fernandez because of Air Asia. But thank you very much. You already mentioned the Munich Security Conference, and that's really the key. What happened in Munich is, in a very nutshell, the death of the West. I want to put it very bluntly, because I've been working on it, writing an article at the moment, Goodbye West. And to me, until now, the idea of the West was almost synonymous with NATO and the European Union. And, it's basically transatlantic alliance. And we know that the challenge to that was from China, Russia. They were talking about the competitors. But now we see the challenge. Trump is doing a far more effective job of dismantling the West. Now, how is he doing that? Just at the time, the Munich conference, he called Vladimir Putin and set up a meeting. His minions are setting up the meeting. And what's going to happen? Europeans are not consulted. Even Britain, the special allies, have a special relationship, or claims to have a special relationship. was not consulted. And the Europeans are furious. Now, Trump, they're afraid that he's going to make a deal with Putin that basically stabilizes or entrenches the status quo after 2022, not before 2022. That means it's a win for Russia. And that makes the Europeans extremely frustrated, nervous, and angry. Why? Because the Europeans said, over our dead body, they have said that recovering Ukraine, the UK Prime Minister basically said, they just signed a 100-year alliance with Ukraine, UK and Britain, and said, we'll do whatever it takes to gain back the territory Russia has taken from Ukraine. So that's one thing. Second, he has been attacking NATO, which is the pillar of transatlantic relationship. He, before the second election, he said he will let Russia do whatever Russia wants to do to those countries of NATO that are not meeting the 3% target in defense spending. He also said we'll bring Russia back to G7. Russia was expelled from G7 in 2014 when it annexed Crimea. So he's doing that. Then he imposed sanctions he's doing that to Canada, he's doing that to China, but also to European allies over steel and aluminum. So if you look at all this coming together, and then, of course, the most dramatic thing you would have seen is J.D. Vance, the vice president, saying the Europeans have lost their values, lost their direction. This is not just about military defense spending alliance. It's also a cultural divide. And that is going to encourage the European far right. So the idea of the West, based on institutions like NATO, common values, and also economic partnership, has been severely jolted. And that, to me, is the most, until November, we know world order was changing, and China is rising, and India is rising, and we know all about that. What is new is this. And what will be the consequences remains to be seen. You talked about opportunity. I'll mention one word, and I'm having a fierce debate with some of my American friends about this. I actually think it's good. Not because of Trump. I personally have no feelings for it. But what he's doing is this idea of the West versus the rest. The West as a superior entity, united. Every time there is a crisis, the West comes up, and the rest is kind of not only different, but also inferior. And the idea of the West came from the 19th century imperialism and racism that the Europeans practiced all over the world. Has been really a major fault line in the world order. This will give Europeans an opportunity to rethink this. And one of the consequences could be that greater partnership between Europeans and the rest of the world. And the European Union is already doing that. And this will leave the door open to the US to rejoin the global engagement when Trump is out. So this is a moment, every crisis has an opportunity, as the Chinese say. And this is the opportunity to me to get rid of the West versus the rest divide. So European Union, I know, have problems with Indonesia over tariffs and environmental standards, but the Europeans don't see China in the same way Americans do at the moment. And they are much more, European Union countries are members of AIIB. Britain, Germany, Italy are members of AIIB, which is led by China. In East Asia, we have a regional comprehensive strategic partnership, which doesn't include Europe, but it includes a lot of some American allies, like Australia, like Canada, like Japan, without the US. So my idea is that in the meantime, what will happen is this, what ASEAN calls ASEAN minus X, the world minus Trump, okay? Kind of cooperation will evolve. This is the normative hope, but I think the Europeans will not just wait out Trump, seize this opportunity, and actually build a good global partnership, which they can, if they want to, and in partnership with countries that they have dismissed as competitors and challenges.
Yeah, thank you. So I totally agree with you that the key trends of this emerging world order is, first, we cannot expect American leadership anymore, because Trump is all about make America great again, yeah? And the Western world is fractured and in disarray. I think that much was clear in Munich. And I think the third trend is the rise of the middle powers, yeah? much in the global south. And I think this leads to my question to Vice Minister Hafaz. President Prabowo, there was much expectation about his internationalism. And in fact, he has become the most traveled Indonesian president in the first 100 days ever. Yeah, he's gone to Peru, Brazil, UK, Egypt, Malaysia, India, and so many of these countries. So clearly, the high visibility. And so the question is, where does he want to take Indonesia? And if he speaks about Indonesia leading in the world, where would that leadership be? Because Indonesia cannot lead everywhere, obviously, but in what way does he expect Indonesia to lead the region or the world? Yeah. Can you give us a flavor of that?
Thank you. First, if I continue what Professor Amitav just mentioned, the uncertainty of the geopolitics today is actually getting more and more uncertain. So you don't know who you should create an ally today. Everything is in flux. Everything, especially after Munich Security Conference. So I think if you go down deeper, this is my experience of engagements with a colleague in Europe. Many experts in Europe said that Europe, including Germany, at that time basically make three strategic mistakes, depending on Russian gas, depending on Chinese market, depending on American security umbrella. And this collapsed after the Ukrainian invasions. And this only means just one thing. Europe needs strategic independence, strategic autonomy in its foreign policy. So there is this language. Our language is Indonesian independent and active foreign policy. It is basically almost the same. This is what Europe has been looking for, how they are going to be able to conduct strategic autonomy by itself, whereas us, Indonesia, we have it in our principles of foreign policy. So I think before we talk about where are we going, which direction we are going, the first issue that we have to discuss is what are the principles of foreign policy. So it's anchored in the principle of independent and active. Independent means we are independent in making policies without external pressures. Active means there is activism, as you mentioned, to lead, to provide leadership, to provide cooperation where it's necessary in different parts of the world where it is possible. So this is the principle, Dean. Now, when things get tough in different parts of the world, I think you should concentrate on your region first, right? And that means Asia Pacific. I just came back from my courtesy visits to my colleague in Kuala Lumpur. And I learned that the border trade between Malaysia and Thailand is 40% of the total Malaysia export-import. And our border trade with Malaysia in Sabah and Kalimantan is very small. So we are looking to expand the land border trade. We are looking to expand the sea border trade. And of course, Pak Tony, the air border trade as well, right? So this is about the old story of connectivity, but it's getting even more and more relevant today because we have to prepare ourselves if tariff will come to us from the US or not. We don't know. Uncertainty again. So we need to do that within our region. So if we have a resilience in our region, economic resilience in our region, that I think should be more than enough to create a peaceful area in Southeast Asia. I'm going to give you an example. Because when I've said this, that we need peace and stability in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia, people will look at me and dismiss it. But take a deep breath. Imagine if there is a war between Indonesia and Malaysia, there is a civil war in the island of Sumatra, what will happen to the international trade? the Straits of Malacca and Strait of Singapore. Under the leadership of Pa Hashim, your late father, the safety navigations of Straits of Malacca and Singapore is under Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. So it's a very clear example that the stability in ASEAN, stability in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and other countries in ASEAN in general will also impact, contribute to the global stability as well. So I think this is key. Now, beyond us, beyond ASEAN, of course, we look at Asia, we look at China, we look at Japan, look at Korea and Pacific, and also others new partners that we have been very strong politically, but we have not been strong economically. I'll give you an example, Egypt. Egypt is the first country that provided or make a statement of our independence, okay, against European colonial power. Egypt was the first country. But we have a very low level of trade. It's only $1 billion. And Egypt has an FTA with the whole Africa. Egypt have an FTA with European Union. So we never capitalize this. It looks mundane, but you know, FTA with EU, FTA with Africa. But these are FTA with close to 2 billion people. And we have not leveraged that. So that is why a president had a state visit to Egypt, also along with the D8. I was with the president at the time. So we want to elevate our relation with Egypt on strategic partnership level. So this is just an example, Dian. Of course, at the global level, we still want to see how we deal with the US. There are other ways, some ideas that we can organize ourselves. For instance, we can have an MOU or agreement with states, state level, which actually is not strange because 2 days ago I was in a bilateral meeting between Indonesia and Northern Territory on a critical raw minerals. So on a strategic issue like raw minerals, we work with states of Australia, not with Canberra. So it means that all those bordering Indonesia, as I mentioned to you, is something that we should develop further. So this is where we are going because in principle, we will of course develop cooperations and friendships with all the countries, but we also want to see which is the best way to do it and which way the best way for us to leverage our positions today.
Okay. Let me go to Tony first on this region. Minister Hafaz says that in an uncertain world, the best way to go is the region. And Tony, I don't know anyone who is more a champion of ASEAN than you. In fact, I heard the gossip that when they were looking for a logo of ASEAN, they were going to put your face on the flag, but they didn't do that. But look, the gloomy feeling in Europe, is that in contrast? Does that contrast with a more optimistic feeling in ASEAN? And do you sense there's a more optimism within our region? And what do you think Indonesia should do? What do you expect as the ASEAN champion from Indonesia in terms of role or leadership in ASEAN?
Thank you. I've never been surrounded by so many professors and ministers on foreign policy, so please excuse me from a business perspective. Look, you're right, I've been pushing ASEAN for the best part of 23 years. And AirAsia really grew out of ASEAN. We're probably one of the strongest ASEAN brands. And when everyone was focusing on China and India, I said we have a 700 million market here and an incredible diversity and culture and entrepreneurial zeal. And I also saw that everyone was focusing on the capital cities, but we focused on the secondary and tertiary cities because we saw the greatest growth in doing that. In fact, when we started flying to Bandung, no one flew to Bandung. I knew Bandung because I used to record dangdut music there. I was the king of dangdut at one stage. And when we started flying, we were the first airline to go there. And very soon we had 23 flights a day there, and loads of airlines came. And so that shows the potential of ASEAN. We went from 2 planes to 250, from 200,000 passengers to 90 million, making us the 4th largest airline in Asia. And that was all grown out of ASEAN. So the potential of ASEAN is huge. I think with all the geopolitics, as Vice Minister said, this is a fantastic opportunity for ASEAN. I think ASEAN has succeeded in creating a safe and stable environment. And Indonesia has led the way, has 100% led the way in terms of democracy, in terms of stability, and economic freedom. In the tech side, Indonesia led the way. And so, from my standpoint, I would like more to happen in ASEAN. You've got 3 trillion trade between US and China. There's 469 billion inter-ASEAN trade. And so there's a massive potential to increase the supply chain here, to increase business in our part of the world. But what's needed? I think ASEAN has to be brave. And we really look to Indonesia to lead the way. And I hope, if I'm not speaking out of turn, Indonesia would put more focus on ASEAN than maybe BRICS or some of the other organizations around. Because I think America and Europe, power and economic strength matter. And I think ASEAN can really be a big player in that stage. And Indonesia has to lead. It's the largest country. It has the largest
Population.
democracy around. And so I hope, and ASEAN has been, it's moved forward. It's definitely more optimistic than it was. But as a businessman, I'd love to see much more. I'd love to see the invisible barriers drop, where everyone's a little bit scared to take that step forward because it might hurt my economy if I give in more to the rest, or I'm bigger than I shouldn't give in this. I think free trade, openness of economy, common regulations, all the people in ASEAN will benefit. And Indonesia has to lead the way, for sure.
Let me cut you there. We're friends, right, Tony? So be honest with me. You deal with all ASEAN countries. Name the top 2 where it's easiest to deal with those countries in terms of bureaucracy. And be honest with me.
We're not friends anymore.
Top 2.
I'm sitting next to a minister. What am I going to say? Well, actually, I'll be very honest, as I am. I generally get in trouble because I am very transparent, and I say what I believe. And I said to Minister Rosan twice, the easiest government to have dialogue with is Indonesia. There's no 2 ways about it. From the days of Bapak Jokowi to now, to get your ideas across, to talk about things that will make my airline and my businesses better, it's very easy to have that dialogue. Okay? The second country, just so I'm not in trouble, of course, Malaysia. That's not true, by the way.
All right, good. I'll move to Yuki, Professor Yuki. The Vice Minister talks about economic opportunities in the region. And in Indonesia, the President Prabowo has set a target of 8% growth for the medium term. Yeah, and the question is, how can he achieve that, especially in foreign policy terms? Yeah, what would be, as an Indonesianist, how would that high target be achieved? At least coming close to that target, given the difficult international environment.
Well, first of all, I think the answers are going to come from the private sector, right? But the enabling environment that the government provides is going to be really key here. I just moved here from Washington, D.C. 6 weeks ago, and there have been a few changes back home. And so I understand there's a reason why, you know, with a lot of these radical changes that are going on, there's a tendency to want to say, okay, how are we going to respond? And I actually think it's better to take a longer view on this, right? So yes, there is US-China rivalry. It's going to heat up with the trade war and whatnot, right? But I think it's important actually for Indonesia and the region to focus on itself. So focus more domestically and regionally, like the Vice Minister, like Tony just mentioned, right? A little bit kind of like Deng Xiaoping when China was still developing early on, he said, you know, lie low and bide your time, right? And I think Indonesia could do that. And I think it's in line with Indonesia's stance, which is to be friends with everyone, right? So there's actually a good opportunity when we're moving, you know, it used to be during the Soviet US Cold War, you know, you had countries that were in the middle that could play both sides, right? And then we moved to unipolar world. We're actually going back to a bipolar world. So there is some opportunity for ASEAN, for Indonesia in that sense, right? But I honestly think you should always start with your strengths. So what are Indonesia's strengths? Well, it's the fourth largest country in the world, but in 25 years, it's likely to be the fourth or fifth largest by GDP. And investors know this, right? So how can this be leveraged, but also unlocked for a lot of different ways, right? It's also, you know, the center of regional diplomacy with ASEAN Secretariat being here. And it's young and tech savvy. And I think this is where a lot of the interesting opportunities are going to sort of come up. So in particular, what I'm thinking about is, you know, if you look at how digitally connected Indonesians are, everyone has a cell phone in the urban areas, but that penetration is reaching closer and closer into the rural areas, right? So as Tony mentioned, actually, our focus shouldn't necessarily be on the cities, right? If you actually deepen into the kabupatens and into the rural areas, this is where you have people who are moving from a cash economy to a digital economy, right? And why is that important for regional relations and economies, right? Well, what it does is it makes all of these consumers, 280 million people, all now part of a regional economy that actually Indonesia can leverage, right? So now, when you move across, you know, to FTA agreement, right, or a bilateral agreement, you're bringing to the table 280 million, not the 130 that are currently, you know, on, you know, digital payment systems right now. So if you increase that penetration, you're opening and expanding these markets, right? Now, this is where moving to Indonesia's position as the largest economy in the region is really important, because Indonesia can set standards, right? So the QRIS, right, QR payments standardization across ASEAN, I think, is a really good initiative, because what it does is it sort of unites these different markets, right? We have these bilateral arrangements right now, but why not have this as a regional approach, right? It's pretty low-hanging fruit, but what does that do? It increases the overall sort of economy of ASEAN, right? And now you're sort of combining both across the region, but within the region. Now, when you're negotiating with external actors, you can say, look, we're bringing to bear all of these consumers. That's really a huge point of leverage when you know, move across to other regions, right? That said, I think it's important, and I think, you know, you were getting at this with your question as to what are the easiest countries to do business with. I think we can all acknowledge that Indonesia is not at the top, right? That's obviously not a great thing, but it's an opportunity here, because imagine unlocking the power of 280 million digitally connected consumers, right? When you can get some of these right? Increasing the ease of doing business. Now, actually, you have a lot more leverage when you come to the table, when you're negotiating bilateral and multilateral trade agreements and investment, right? And that's really where I think you can really strengthen Indonesia's hand. So I actually am very optimistic about Indonesia's position. It's just, how are you going to unlock the potential there through, I think, some pretty low-hanging fruit, to be honest. And I think deepening the market internally and increasing the connectivity regionally is probably a good start.
Okay. So, Professor Yuki talked about economic resilience. I want to go back to the Vice Minister. And again, what I saw in Munich was great concern about the rules-based international order, right? And as we know, after World War II, rules-based international order, what they call liberal international order, was the operational environment for everybody. But now, exceptionalism seems to be prominent. You know, the Americans said, yeah, the rules apply to everybody, but except me. Yeah, and double standard was very high. And in fact, now some countries are saying double standards are normal. Don't expect us to be inconsistent, right? Which means businesses need to operate in rules-based order, and nations also, because without rules, without consistency, they are just different norms, and anybody can do what they want. Yeah, and that is a dangerous environment. So I guess the question is, at a time when the rules are less important and double standards predominant, who will defend the rules-based international order if the Americans are not able to do so, if the Russians are not able to do so, Israel are not able to do so? Would Indonesia step up to become the defender of that rules base? Or would Indonesia response be, no, let's reform or create a different world order, maybe through BRICS or through other mechanisms, but definitely let's go another route. So I guess that's my question to you. Would Indonesia defend the rules-based world order when others are not expected to do so? Or would we go another way through BRICS to reform or change the world order?
I think no one should defend rule-based international order because that is a wrong concept to begin with.
That's going to be the headline. You know that, right?
I'm talking as a lawyer, Pak Tony. So, rule-based international order is wrong. The right one is international law-based order. So the discussion of RBIO has been there for a while, starting from discussion in Europe. And when I was in Germany, I keep saying that rule-based international order is wrong because it is rule made by certain guys who make the order. And that is why you see what's happening today. So the order are developed by a few, and the few creates the rules. And we all are expected to follow their rules. It should be international law-based order because international law is a law that is negotiated by everybody, become a treaty, ratified, become a national law, accepted domestically. It is rooted domestically. See, I learned this from your father. So it's this notion, I think, that is this different in the beginning. So my take is always that international relation is not perfect. International relation has all these discrepancies, as you rightly see. Some powerful countries believe the might is right. But I would say international law is still quite intact, okay? You can find it in a daily mundane situation, like when Pak Tony organized 2,000 flights. Do you follow the ICAO rules or not?
We have no choice but to follow them.
You have to follow. So you're right. So when those who own ships, they run shipping, they follow the IMO rules, right? So when you put your mobile phone, you follow international rules. When you send a post, a letter, you follow international rules. So these are rules that are actually intact. These are international law that are already intact. So I don't think any particular power will be able to change this kind of international law, international rule. Now, when you talk about geopolitics, that becomes something else, right? This is the challenge today, and I think who should defend international law is all the member states of any particular international law. We all have to defend it. Indonesia, in terms of law of the sea, we have to defend UNCLOS. We have to implement it. We have to defend it by giving examples. And we have to demand and we have to state clearly for countries, big or small, who are not in the relations with international law as such. So today, as I mentioned earlier, but there's a lot of uncertainty. But when we talk about who should be at the forefront, everybody should be at the forefront because international law, as such, in general terms, it's something that we have to fight for it. Because if there is no international law, there is no international flight path, right? There is no shipping, there is no supply chain, there is no commerce. Although WTO is basically defunct without panel, but still, right? Although WHO is having difficulties, the US is not there anymore, but still, organization with very specific, international laws in it.
Do you feel that because standards of behavior have changed, does that affect our foreign policy mindset? In words that, look, Indonesia is expected to behave a certain way. That's the standard of behavior. But why should we do it when that country doesn't apply any standard at all? I mean, for example, Americans claiming the Greenland, the sovereign territory of another country, and an ally country, standards have really dropped. Yeah. But how does Indonesia, in terms of foreign policy behavior,
We are a nation of principle, right?
Yeah.
Probably we are the only country, or probably few of the country that specifically states our foreign policy in our constitution. So our standard behavior reference is our constitution, not U.S. government, not any other government, right? Because if you start doing that, then we don't need to have a criminal code, for instance. Because the fact that we have criminal code, you're not allowed to kill someone, but someone kills someone else doesn't necessarily mean, okay, let's kill each other, right? So it's the principle of law is almost the same, whether it's international law, whether it's domestic law, constitutional law, or criminal law. So our foreign policy is based on very clear principles, right? Also, it's not. That's why when I mentioned about strategic autonomy, independent and active, our decision is based on that particular principle. So if others are doing something else, it does not necessarily mean we have to follow that. Because by having a principled foreign policy, we ascertain our neighbors of certainty. And I think that is why ASEAN, in many discussions around the world, is considered to be the second most successful regional organization in the world. We are not EU. We can never become the EU. I don't think we should become EU. But ASEAN as it is need to work even further, as by Tony mentioned, deeper integrations, deeper market integrations, deeper service integration, so that it will open up a lot of economic opportunity within our region, and that it can be leveraged towards our larger neighbor in East Asia, towards the Pacific, or toward other regional players in the world.
Okay. Let me go to Amitav. Amitav again. You are a student of Indonesian foreign policy. I think you're writing a report on Indonesian foreign policy since 2 or 3 years ago. What would you say to be the new trends of Indonesian foreign policy, especially now there's a new president, a new foreign minister and vice ministers, and so on. I would love to get your take as an outside scholar on this. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm actually an inside scholar. I'm the only one wearing batik. But I think I should write this book with the minister because we are actually in complete agreement on 2 things. One is the rules-based order. Who created these rules? I've been talking about this since 2014 when I first published The End of American World Order. Also, there's one thing I want to add based on my new book just about to come out. I studied 5,000 years of history. I'm not bluffing. It took me 10 years and teaching research to actually find one of the things. Where were these rules-based order? I found more than a dozen instances of rules-based order. One of them in Southeast Asia, Malacca-centered, Aceh-centered, Indian Ocean free trade. It was rules-based. It's actually written, Undang-Undang Laut Malacca. It's written how much you pay for damages, how much, who pays what customs duty. And Indian Ocean was the largest oceanic trade area in the world. This is before the Europeans so-called discovered the Atlantic, Americas. So rules-based order is not a Western monopoly. There was a rules-based order in the Near East between Egypt, Hittites, and a bunch of powers, and they maintained peace for 200 years, as opposed to the European concert that did for 100 years. So if you want to see, the book is coming out, The Once and Future World Order, 5,000 Years of History. I found that many of the institutions we think West has invented actually had been invented somewhere else first. And it's not a monopoly. The second thing about, in specific to Indonesia, by the way, I want to walk back just in one sentence. When I say the end of the West is a good thing, it does not mean, and certainly mean, the end of Western civilization. No. It's the West as a political, racial, intellectually superior idea, which was a product of the Enlightenment. And this is very, very clearly argued now, not only in my book, but by a lot of post-colonial scholars. That's the idea we want to get rid of, not Western civilization or the living standards, well-being of the Europeans or the Americans. And the emerging powers cannot maintain world order without the West. We can talk about China, Russia, India. I have said this. They cannot maintain or manage world order on their own. They need the West. So it is the ending the West versus the rest, which has been the really major fault line. We created this very artificial divide, despite the fact that West got a lot of ideas from the rest and rest got a lot of ideas from the West. We should get rid of that. On Indonesia, I have a couple of observations. Minister may disagree with me, but I think it will be a good occasion for us to reflect and debate. One is that I see the foreign policy is more security focused in the last few months. Second, I see the president is much more hands-on than any president has ever been, including, by the way, your SPY.
They say he's actually the foreign minister
Yeah,
as well.
exactly. And the third thing, and they're not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, there's no reason why President should not. I mean, Sukarno was very much I interviewed Rasulullah Abdul Ghani personally before he died, and Sukarno was very much hands-on in some ways. But the third thing that I see is that Indonesia is now, what I say, the global engagement. Of course, you reassure us that ASEAN is still important, region is important, but from an outsider, when you say, well, the previous president is hesitating to join the BRICS, and the new president comes in, the first thing he does is join the BRICS. Now, not a bad thing, I think it's a good thing, but there is a more global ambition here, rather than just a regional focus. And those two things are not either or, but there are a couple of risks and also fears. One is whether Indonesia is trying to become too assertive. It's not bebas active, but bebas assertive. Okay, and this will be a concern for some of our neighbors. You can reassure them, and that's what this whole game of regionalism is about. Another fear, another concern would be whether Indonesia can cope with all these burdens and maintain what I call the single most important achievement of Indonesia is what I call trifecta. It's one of the very few countries in the world that have maintained three things together: stability, economic growth, and security. So, sorry, stability, economic growth, and democracy, sorry. No other country in Southeast Asia has it to the same degree, since at least the Reformasi era. Now, if you focus too much on foreign policy and global role, I hope you're paying attention to maintaining this virtuous cycle of stability, prosperity, or growth, let's say growth, and democracy. And people might be a bit concerned that this assertive, well, I'm not saying it's assertive yet, but what could become assertive might detract from the domestic achievements of Indonesia, which have been really the major basis for the international respect it enjoys.
Okay. I'm gonna allow questions now. We still have 15 minutes, and please let me know who you want to ask a question to. I see one person, Adam Swartz. Yeah. So I'll take those two questions. But before that, maybe I'll ask either Tony or Yuki. We've been talking about ASEAN, yeah. And Tony, you're very involved on connectivity, right? Do you think, ASEAN has made a strategic decision to be a people-centered association, where ASEAN decisions have to benefit the people, and people-to-people contact has to be the prime mover of ASEAN. Are we closer to that goal? Because as I see, government-to-government relations are very strong, but I'm not seeing much people-to-people exchanges within ASEAN.
Yeah, that's a great question. And over the last 20 years, we see more Indonesians going to Thailand, more Filipinos going to Malaysia, etc., because it really wasn't connected. That's not the fault of ASEAN, it was the fault of the connectors. So I think ASEAN is beginning to understand each other much better on the people side. It's a great question because everyone talks about the politics, everyone talks about the stability and the economics. The soft side of ASEAN needs to be brought up a little bit. So if many people would criticize the Secretary of Defense for not knowing ASEAN, but then you should look at ASEAN itself. It needs to brand itself better. I have been, and we talk about Indonesia leadership, I've been trying to change the SEA Games to the ASEAN Games. SEA's irrelevant. So the first place I went to was Indonesia to say, would you support us? And yes, they did. And now we're moving very quickly towards calling it the ASEAN Games. Sport is a very important part of unifying ASEAN. I started an ASEAN Basketball League. I think it would be fantastic if we had an ASEAN Football League. And I talked to the FIFA president about it recently. If we had a Jakarta United versus Singapore City versus Kuala Lumpur, it'd be much bigger. We're now beginning to see, obviously I came from the music business, in Indonesia movies and Thai movies and music. K-pop has really come from Thailand. The beats came from Thai pop, from Bird and Christina. So I really hope ASEAN also pushes the integration of people, that the people of ASEAN see the benefit of ASEAN. I mean, they see the benefit of AirAsia because we give low fares and Lion Air and others ASEAN brands. And so the ASEAN leaders should also be focusing on integrating people more, creating more unity through sports, arts and culture, drama, etc. That side, if you look at Korea, they've done an unbelievable job. But it wasn't just done by their private initiatives. The government put a lot of effort into it. K-pop didn't just arrive. And so you're very right. As in being in the ASEAN BAT this year, I've really asked the council members to focus on the softer side of ASEAN and bringing ASEAN people together and making ASEAN relevant to the 700 million people.
And maybe to Yuki, there is a perception that in the last 10 years or so, ASEAN leaders were not as close, as intimate as before. Remember the time of Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, Suharto, and Mahathir, and so on, yeah? But now we have a new generation of leaders. We have in Indonesia, President Prabowo, Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, Anwar Ibrahim is a relatively new, a new leader. And we have new leadership in Vietnam, in Cambodia, right? In Thailand also, and also in the Philippines, yeah. Even a new president, a returning president in Timor-Leste. What are the hopes or the chances that this batch of leadership can reclaim the intimacy, the closeness of the previous ASEAN leaders? Because that's really the glue that turned ASEAN to become much closer community.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually the future is the past. I think that really is what it comes back down to, right? Because if you think about ASEAN, right? Where I live, or I used to live until 6 weeks ago, in Washington, whenever ASEAN came up, it was criticized. It's ineffective. It doesn't do anything, right? It's sluggish. What is it doing on Myanmar, et cetera, right? That's always the narrative. South China Sea, is there any? It's always consensus-based, right? And I always push back. I actually say, well, think about what ASEAN does for its members, not for the US or for China, right? That's how you should be thinking about it, right? So going back to what ASEAN was originally designed for, it was in the early 1960s when the Filipinos and Malaysians were interfering in each other's business. The Indonesians were interfering with Singapore and Malaysia's business. And so there was a lot of sort of internal fighting. And so they established ASEAN to sort of prevent that from happening again, right? And so it's always good to, I think, remind people, first of all, what is ASEAN for? And not try to make it something else, right? You can make other arrangements, right, with, within the ASEAN grouping, right? But I think it's important to always remind ourselves what is the fundamental thing, and that's basically to keep the peace here. And on that score, it's probably one of the most successful organizations in the world at doing so, right? And it's not something to sniff your nose at, because it's actually something that was real just 50 years ago, right? So I think it's always important to remind people, right, and the leaders to sort of say, look, here's what we've achieved, right? But also to think about this region as a model for different things that have been achieved, especially on Indonesia's score, right? So, for example, you have peace building. You're going to show a film later tonight on Aceh, right? Well, actually, when I'm in the Philippines, in Mindanao, they always ask, what did Indonesia do in Aceh, right? How is this, so Indonesia is a model for that. Democracy, right? Well, actually, when Indonesia democratized in '98, there was statistically no reason to believe that it was going to succeed, because it was at a level of GDP way below the level that normally you succeed at, right? And so it was a real surprise. What is it, right? So actually Indonesia could be sort of seen as a model for democratization, for peace building, for disaster relief, things like that. So that's what I would leave it at. I think it's just about highlighting what the achievements are in the region.
Thank you. We got two questions. Gentleman in front, and then Adam. I'll take the two of them in a row. Can somebody give a microphone to somebody? Okay, I'll get Christine. We need more gender balance, so we get three questions, but I don't want a speech. I want one question only, not one question ABC, yeah? Please, yeah.
Thank you very much, Pak Dino. I'm Brian. I teach geopolitics and philosophy at the University of Hong Kong. My question is quite simple. When we speak of ASEAN foreign policy, we tend to emphasize hedging and balancing between a multitude of poles, or reefs in this case. What are the conditions required for ASEAN, and more specifically Indonesia, to become a reef itself? And is that even desirable to begin with in the first place? And that's a question I have directed for Professor Amitabh Acharya, a dear friend. Thank you.
Okay, can I suggest that question for Vice Minister Hafaz, because he's the one who will...
Oh, absolutely.
Actually, okay.
My apologies, Vice Minister. Back, absolutely.
Adam? Yes.
Adam Schwartz, Asia Group Advisor. My question also for Bahavas, or Dino, feel free to jump in. Really, it's about BRICS. What was the change in the calculation? Last year we made a statement that Indonesia did not want to join BRICS, and this year it does. What was the change in the calculation, and going forward, what do you hope to get from that membership?
Okay, Christine Chin in the back. Can I get a microphone to Kristen, somebody? Yeah. She's from the China Policy Group. Yeah.
Thank you, Pak Dino. My name is Christine Susana Chin from Gentala Institute. My question is also for Pak Hafaz and also Mr. Tajima. With regard to the South China Sea, as part of the sort of more sort of like intense situation in the region, with the joint development plan established between Indonesia and China, and how do you see the role of the private sector in the future in stabilizing the situation in the South China Sea? Will that sort of like cross the line in terms of international law or UNCLOS? How do we see that? Because earlier I was having a chat with friends in FPCI about their survey about making South China Sea establishing a public goods there. So if I can sort of like have your views on the role of private sectors on stabilizing the area. Thank you.
Okay. You seem to be very popular, Vice Minister. So the questions addressed to you, please.
Thanks. I don't really get the first questions.
Will Indonesia become a reef?
No, of course not. We are islands. We have 17,000 islands. Why we want to become a reef? Yeah, we play our role. We are the largest in Southeast Asia. We are the largest archipelagic states in the world. We want to be responsible. We organize, Prof, the Forum of Archipelagic and Island States in the world. Whether or not a country is a big or small, as long as you're island, when you got the rising sea level, it will hit you no matter what. So that is why we play our responsibility in that sense as well. So it is part of the foreign policy activism in there. We are trying to also organize a meeting with tropical forest country. We feel that the carbon price is not fair for us, for instance. Yeah. I recall a discussion in Europe. Someone said that Indonesia should not demand carbon price more than $5 because there is a price in Africa. So somehow our carbon price in Indonesia is being tagged with African price, which is, I think, unfair because the way we organize our forestry is different with other countries. For instance, we are working with palm oil producing country with something called CPOPC. So there are a number of very strategic issue in the world that we want to create an alliance, for the good, the archipelagic and island states, the tropical forest country. We are thinking of looking at the possibility to develop alliance with countries that have a lot of mangrove, for instance. I'm part of the ocean panel, 17 countries. I'm the co-sherpa of the ocean panel. We are working with different countries on different sustainability issue, even things that you think is mundane and not important, seaweed, for instance. We are going to organize a global seaweed alliance, for instance. So these are the things that we do, and we are not going to be too assertive or very assertive or assertive. We are nice people.
Okay. BRICS and South China Sea.
And BRICS and South China Sea. So, of course, new government has a new consideration, Padam. So I think the current government believes that BRICS is another organization that we can be part of and we can leverage our discussions over there. And what I don't really understand is the fuss. BRICS members are G20 members. And India is one of the BRICS countries, and the Indian foreign minister sits at the forefront of the Trump inauguration. So what's the big deal, right? Now I had discussion with Brazil, and they want to organize within the agenda issue like sustainability in coming for the next COP. So this is one of the Brazilian priorities, so which is great for us, especially when you are looking at the fact that the US is not in the Paris Agreement anymore. Developed countries could not deliver the so-called $100 billion, whatever. So they broke their promises. So we will try to find the possible climate financing, for instance, within our discussion in BRICS. So there are a number of issues that we can develop over there, in addition to what we are having, but not too successful in other arena. South China Sea. I don't think we are at the level of looking at joint development yet. We have discussions internally. And we have to look at the joint statement, which specifically mentions that everything has to be based on the law and regulations of the countries. So law and regulation in Indonesia on boundary issue is quite complicated, very detailed, I must say. So we have to identify those things. And of course, we have not changed our positions. And in South China Sea, we don't have a claim. We only have a line. We have alliance with Malaysia. Our line is properly negotiated. We have line with Vietnam. We don't have a claim. So that is the legal position of Indonesia. So it's very clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, but Indonesia's position of not recognizing China's 9-dash line, that remains.
Oh, yeah.
Remains,
Absolutely.
okay. All right.
Yes.
Okay.
Because as a country, as a part of UNCLOS, right? Any claims against ocean, we have to ask the country that lost the claim, please explain to us in detail what are the legal basis of your claim, which article you are using. This is what I, as a chief negotiator of maritime boundaries with Singapore, with Malaysia, this is the first thing that normally we sit together with them. Okay, this is our line, this is our baseline, this is our points, this is the coordinate. Where are yours? What's the basis? Article what? 7, Article 15, Article 51? Sorry, it's coming up again. So,
Okay.
so this is the typical lawyer thing that we do in law of the sea discussions. So we have to look at the convention, we have to look at the law, and then we can discuss something later on. So if you want to say that there is an overlapping, so okay, fine. So just give me your basis. We look at your basis, we look at which law that you are using, and we can discuss that later on. But please come and explain to us which part of the Convention of Law of the Sea that they use to lay your claim. Which article? 3, 4, 7, 15, or 51? Thank you, Marina.
Can I just add one? I mean, that's the rules-based order. And the United States has not ratified our law of the sea. So Indonesia, just the kind of argument you're making, that is a rules-based order. And that's the kind of argument I've seen done in history in Indian Ocean, in Malacca. So why should we think the United States, I hope it's temporary, US will come back under a new Democratic president or a new Republican president. But under the next 4 years, we just have to put up with this. But you defend it. Is the emerging powers, like Indonesia, will defend the rules-based order?
Yes. And by the way, we've been expecting the United States to ratify United States Convention on the Law of the Sea since 1982. Now it's 2025. And Vice Minister Hafaz, I'm not sure if in my lifetime I can expect the United States to ratify because, in the Senate, it's just a no-go.
That's what I call X-1. There
Yeah.
have been many cases like Law of the Sea, which continue to survive and do relatively well, despite the U.S. not joining.
Yes.
And I can tell you, International Criminal Court, and still has normative effect. So I don't think we should think that Trump is the end of all order.
Yes.
Anyway, Dino,
Okay.
while everyone's worried about the
Please.
stresses of the world,
And yeah, we got to wrap up in 1 minute. Yes.
I suggest to everyone to forget Donald Trump, forget the problems of the world, go onto AirAsia, book a flight, and have a great holiday. Okay?
Tony is the ultimate marketeer of ASEAN, right? And, we spoke for I think, 60 minutes. I think the last 5 minutes is the ones that are going to get the headline. So thank you, everybody. I want to invite everybody to give a big round of applause for all the panelists. And thank you very much for joining us here. And sorry, Yuki, we didn't get to you, but time's up. Yeah. So thank you very much. Yeah.
All right, Mr. Dino Patijala, thank you so much for leading the last session of the Indonesia Economic Summit 2025. And that was a very, very kicking the last session of the whole summit. We thank all speakers and moderator, of course. And also would like to give a token of appreciation from IBC. And for this, would like to invite one more time Mr. William Sabandar from IBC Board to come forward and deliver the token of appreciation. it was very fruitful, and hopefully what we discussed today can be a good foundation for the next actions. Once again, we thank you for your insights, all speakers, and also the moderator. And also, gentlemen, let's have group picture together. All right. In 3, 2, 1. All right, we love that smile of yours. Thank you so much once again.